When I entered my residence, the scent of lavender air freshener hit me immediately. The issue being that air fresheners aren't something I use. What caught my attention next was my television broadcasting a home improvement program I'd never viewed before. Then, emanating from my kitchen, I heard her voice, "Oh, you really ought to dispose of that spice rack. It's so outdated from 2009. This precise moment made me understand that the Homeowners Association president had used a duplicate key to enter my home, helped herself to my whiskey, and was now evaluating my home decor as though she were hosting a design show. I remained there shocked as she discussed feng shui and energy circulation in my sitting area. That's when I recognized something completely crazy was occurring, and it wasn't merely the lavender fragrance. This was warfare. When I first encountered Karen, she presented me with a plastic-covered booklet called The 47 Methods You're Breaking HOA Rules. That ought to have been my initial warning sign. The second warning was her self-designation as the community's architect of organization. The third warning, she never closed her eyes, not even once. She was constantly observing, constantly evaluating, constantly appearing with her writing pad and 3-inch heels as if campaigning for leadership of a residential tyranny. However, as long as she remained within her property boundaries, I was indifferent until she crossed them. I had recently come back from a 4-day business journey, nothing elaborate, just a technology conference in Seattle. I was exhausted, somewhat affected by jet lag, and primarily anticipating collapsing on my sofa. Instead, I discovered Karen positioned in my kitchen, mixing a cup of tea using my utensil. I assumed I had entered the incorrect residence, but no. There was my nephew's photograph on the fireplace mantel, the silly small succulent on the window ledge that I consistently forget to hydrate, and the mark on the wooden flooring where I accidentally dropped a toolbox the previous summer. This was definitely my residence, yet Karen was behaving as if it were a prepared house, showing she was planning to market. "Karen," I inquired, utterly confused. She rotated around nonchalantly, gripping my cup as though it belonged to her dish collection. "Oh, greetings, Ethan," she responded with an inflection as if we were meeting for a casual meal. "I simply stopped by to ensure everything was satisfactory. You understand?" "You what?" I didn't shout. Not initially. I was too astonished for that response. "Well, we maintain the emergency key storage at the HOA headquarters, and since your travel announcement was published in the community bulletin, I considered it wise to verify that no one had burglarized the place." "But you're the person who committed the burglary." Karen gazed at me as though I were a child who couldn't comprehend how house keys function. "It's not burglary when you possess a key, sweetheart. It's included in our security program, page 14 of the property owner manual." I didn't possess a property owner manual. I wasn't even aware I remained a member of the HOA. I had submitted legal withdrawal paperwork months earlier after Karen attempted to penalize me for cultivating sunflowers beside my fence. She claimed they drew bees, and bees weren't community appropriate. However, clearly she never handled the documentation, or she disregarded it, or even worse, she destroyed it while keeping the key regardless. She eventually departed after I repeated the term, police, 3 times, but before exiting she had the audacity to comment, "You should genuinely reconsider that kitchen backsplash. It's depressing." The door shut, I secured it behind her, then sat on the sofa in total quietness. I wanted to convince myself it was a singular occurrence. Perhaps she was merely curious, perhaps she had good intentions, perhaps she genuinely believed she was being supportive, even if her definition of supportive included criticizing my decorative cushions and potentially examining my refrigerator contents. But the following morning, I observed something unusual. A picture frame on my desk had been shifted slightly leftward. It was subtle, but I'm particular about details. Then I examined the waste container and noticed a takeout box I didn't recall discarding. Thai cuisine I hadn't consumed in more than a week. That evening, I set up a motion detecting camera in the corridor just as a precaution. I didn't inform anyone. I didn't want to become that type of person. But the next day brought additional evidence: a missing banana from the bunch I had recently purchased, a sofa cushion flipped upside down, a partially used toilet paper roll substituted with a different brand. That night I reviewed the recording. There she was, Karen, at 20:38 in the afternoon, entering with assurance and carrying a small poodle in her arms like it was an official symbol. She placed the dog down, moved around the living area, picked up one of my books, How to Build a Pergola, made a dismissive sound, then used the restroom. She exited 12 minutes afterward. I replayed the video, then watched it a third time. I stared at the monitor as if it might malfunction and display someone else. Anyone else, but it was consistently Karen. I sent the footage to my email account, then created 6 duplicates. I wasn't simply dealing with an intrusive neighbor. I was confronting someone who believed she possessed legal access to my residence. The most frightening aspect was her ability to enter silently and undetected. I couldn't sleep that evening. I kept wondering if she's been doing this during my absence. How many times has she done it while I'm sleeping? The following morning, I marched directly to the HOA headquarters and insisted on speaking with someone superior to Karen. But naturally, Karen held every position: president, secretary, treasurer. She constituted the entire board. She sat behind her workstation, consuming a kale smoothie, and smiled upon seeing me. "Good morning, Ethan. I admire what you've accomplished with your lawn borders, so neat." I didn't attempt to fake pleasantness. "Hand over the spare key immediately." She tapped her tablet. "I'm unable to comply with that request. HOA regulations require key access for emergency inspection purposes. I'm not part of this HOA. That's questionable." "No, isn't. Would you care to examine the clause?" She turned the screen to display a document I'd never encountered before. Apparently, she had restored my HOA membership retroactively through something she termed protective rezoning. I couldn't even comprehend the legal terminology she presented. My name appeared on a roster, my fees were outstanding, my rights were apparently non-existent. I stopped arguing, I left, drove to the closest hardware retailer, and purchased the most sophisticated smart lock system available. Fingerprint reader, passcode entry, phone application notifications, the complete fortress. Then I contacted my sister Mia, who formerly worked in cybersecurity for an energy company. She arrived that evening with a portable monitoring kit, a Bluetooth signal blocker, and a very concerning smile. "Let's enjoy ourselves," she said as she mounted a camera inside a decorative wall vent, another in a lamp, one above the doorbell. She rewired the door frame to activate a silent notification to her laptop whenever it opened without the correct fingerprint or code. By the time she left, my house had become a digital stronghold. But this wasn't merely about security anymore, it was about retribution. I wasn't going to confront Karen directly, wasn't going to plead or intimidate or demand. I was going to allow her to walk right back inside as she always did, except this time the reception committee would be wearing badges and carrying restraints. The following few days were quiet, but the anxiety never disappeared. Every floor creak, every shadow beyond the window made me question if she had returned. I barely slept, constantly monitoring the camera feeds like an obsessed person. Mia, always the composed technician in this chaos, continued refining the surveillance setup. She even installed a tiny motion triggered sensor beneath the floor covering just inside the entrance, so we'd know the precise moment someone crossed the threshold. Karen had no clue that her little scheme was about to end. She assumed this was just another house she could wander into as if it were part of a guided tour. But this wasn't a tour. It was a snare. We didn't need to wait long. The following Saturday, I announced on the neighborhood application that I was traveling to a family wedding out of state. A deception, naturally. I even positioned my vehicle several streets away to make the illusion convincing. Then Mia and I concealed ourselves in the guest bedroom with refreshments, laptops, and phones connected to the camera network. We observed the front door feed silently for almost 6 hours. Just when we thought we might be wasting our time, her recognizable SUV entered my driveway as if it belonged there. It was 20:40 in the afternoon. Karen emerged dressed in a light-colored blouse and broad-brimmed sun hat as if she were attending brunch with a politician. In her hand was the notorious HOA key collection. She glanced around briefly, confirming what she presumably thought was an unoccupied house, then marched up the porch as if she were conducting a private viewing. She inserted the master key, but it wouldn't rotate. She frowned, attempted another, same outcome. Her posture shifted. She crouched and inspected the lock, then retrieved a lock-picking toolkit. That's when I understood she had progressed from nosy to criminal. The camera above the door recorded every moment. Karen carefully worked the lock for 2 minutes straight, grumbling about difficult residents and security improvements. When the door finally clicked open, she didn't hesitate. She entered as if it were her daily routine. The instant she passed over the mat sensor, Maya's laptop chimed. She nodded to me. I lifted the phone and called the non-emergency police number we'd arranged in advance. They'd promised a discreet approach. No lights, no drama. Just sufficient to catch her in the act without alerting her too early. As I spoke quietly into the phone, Mia accessed the hallway camera feed. Karen was in my kitchen again, this time searching through drawers. "She's examining expiration dates on your cereal," Mia whispered. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream. Karen moved next to the living room, removed a framed picture from the wall, cleaned the edge with her sleeve, and scoffed. She wandered upstairs. We watched as she entered my bedroom and began opening closet doors, even taking a pair of running shoes and holding them to her face as if evaluating the odor. When she finally sat on my bed and began browsing through my television remote, I heard sirens in the distance. Maya's phone buzzed. The police had arrived and were approaching the house. They knocked firmly but not loudly. Karen, startled, jumped off the bed and rushed downstairs. She opened the door expecting perhaps a delivery or a friendly neighbor. Instead, she found 2 officers standing on the porch. "Mom, this property has reported an unauthorized entry," the taller officer said, glancing at the tablet he held. "Are you the owner of this residence?" Karen, ever the performer, adjusted her blouse and smiled sweetly. "I'm the HOA president. I was simply conducting a wellness check on behalf of the community. Do you have written permission to enter this home?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a wrinkled document, the same FACO bylaw she tried to show me. The officer took it, scanned it quickly, and raised an eyebrow. "Mom, this homeowner officially opted out of the HOA 6 months ago. This document has no legal standing. You are not authorized to be here." Karen's face dropped. "But he never submitted Form 10F, and technically this property still falls under our care standards. I was just trying to help. Honestly, if you saw the state of his pantry, you'd understand." The second officer stepped past her into the foyer. "I'm gonna have to ask you to step outside, ma'am." "But I have a key? That means it's not breaking in, right?" Mom, the key doesn't belong to you, and using it without consent is unlawful entry. We have video footage from internal security cameras showing you inside the home without permission. You'll need to come with us." Karen's voice cracked, caught somewhere between indignation and disbelief. "This is ridiculous. I'm the authority figure here. I run this neighborhood. You can't treat me like some common criminal." "You're being treated like someone who broke into a private residence," the officer replied calmly, pulling out his handcuffs. "Turn around, please." As she began to protest louder, attracting the attention of neighbors. 1 or 2 peeked out of their windows. A few stepped onto their lawns. Karen noticed and shifted her tone into full theatrical mode. "I was framed. He invited me in. This is a setup." Just then, I walked down the driveway. Mia followed, phone still recording. Karen locked eyes with me and gasped like she'd seen a ghost. This is your doing. Karen, I said evenly, you broke into my home multiple times. It's all on camera. You left your fingerprints on my wine glasses and your poodle's hair on my couch. You used OA resources to stalk your neighbors, and worst of all, you insulted my spice rack. The neighbors laughed. Karen didn't. She struggled briefly, but the officers stayed firm as they placed her in the back of the cruiser. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, "I will sue you! This neighborhood needs discipline. You'll regret this." The officer gently shut the door, muffling her cries. The car pulled away slowly, leaving behind a small crowd of stunned neighbors and one very satisfied homeowner. I turned to Mia, who was reviewing the footage. "Do we post it?" she asked. I thought for a moment, then nodded. "Post the part where she calls my hardwood floors soulless. That one deserves a national audience." Within the hour, the video was uploaded, a 90-second compilation of Karen entering, judging my books, snooping in my pantry, and getting handcuffed by police. The internet handled the rest. Within 12 hours, the video reached 30,000 views. By morning, the local news had contacted me. But while Karen sat in a holding cell screaming about bylaws and community harmony, I was already thinking ahead. The HOA wouldn't go down without a fight. If Karen was the queen, the board was her loyal court. And now that she was dethroned, they were going to come after me next. And that was fine because I had more footage, more records, more allies than they thought. I was done playing defense. The next battle was coming, and I was ready. The following morning, I woke up to find 3 crisp, wet envelopes stuffed into my mailbox. All of them bore the HOA's emblem, a ridiculous gold eagle perched on a fence, and inside each was a different flavor of absurd. The first was a notice accusing me of unauthorized security modifications, referring to my new locks and surveillance system. The second claimed I had hosted a public disturbance, referencing Karen's arrest as if I were the one who dialed up a marching band and paraded her out in handcuffs. And the third, my personal favorite, was a bill, a $2,500 emergency enforcement fee for causing undue alarm and creating an unsafe neighborhood environment. According to the HOA, I had violated the harmony of the community by protecting my own home. Mia nearly dropped her coffee when I read the letter aloud. "They're billing you for getting broken into," she asked, eyes wide. "No," I corrected her, holding up the paper. "They're billing me for stopping someone from breaking in." The HOA hadn't just gone tone deaf, they were going full circus. I could practically hear Karen's ghost dictating these letters from the back of a police cruiser. This was retaliation, plain and simple, a warning shot across my lawn. And it didn't stop there. Over the next week, passive-aggressive emails and notices kept trickling in. A citation for excessive grass growth, even though I'd mowed it 2 days prior. A noise violation from when my neighbor's dog barked while standing on my property line. The most ridiculous one, a warning that my house number wasn't up to reflective safety standards. I ran out and bought the most reflective numbers I could find, then covered the entire mailbox in chrome just for fun. Karen, meanwhile, was very much out of jail and very much on a mission. Her social media pages lit up with posts painting herself as a victim. She shared a highly edited video clip where she was mid-sob, clutching a flower bouquet and claiming she was wrongfully detained for checking on a grieving neighbor. The comments were split, half her usual minions offering sympathy and calling me a bully, the other half demanding to know why she had a lockpick set in her purse. She even did an impromptu live stream from her porch, dramatically reading fake quotes she attributed to me. Things like, "This neighborhood should burn down for all I care," while wind chimes jingled ominously behind her like a budget horror movie. But the real problem wasn't her social media meltdown, it was that she still had influence. The HOA board, though quieter now, was clearly circling the wagons. I started to hear whispers from neighbors, complaints filed on their behalf without their consent, landscaping crews rerouted. One woman, Donna, knocked on my door nearly in tears after she received a bill for repainting her mailbox, a mailbox that hadn't been touched in years. "I think they're making it up," she said. "They said I approved it in writing, but I never signed anything." That's when I realized this was bigger than me. Karen may have been caught, but the system she built was still alive and kicking. She'd ruled that HOA with an iron spreadsheet for years, and now that she'd been publicly embarrassed, her loyal board members were fighting her proxy war. I couldn't sit back anymore. I started collecting stories, email threads, complaint letters, text messages. Donna's mailbox fee. The neighbor whose backyard shed got labeled a fire hazard after he spoke out at a meeting. A couple who'd been fined for having unapproved wind chimes, even though they didn't own any. Maya helped me build a digital vault with timestamps, photos, and testimony. But I knew none of it would matter if it didn't go public. So I posted a new video, calm, fact-driven, no dramatic editing. Just me sitting on my porch, walking through the timeline, Karen's unlawful entries, the surveillance footage, the fake documents, the retaliation. And most importantly, I left the door open. "If this has happened to you," I said, "you're not alone. Contact, let's compare notes." Within 48 hours, I had 23 emails in my inbox. Some were short, just a line or two. Others came with PDFs, pictures, even scanned violation slips. One woman had a letter from the HOA ordering her to remove a bench from her front yard because it encouraged loitering. The bench was a memorial to her late husband, who had served in the military. Another man had been fined for excessive flags. He flew one American flag and one Marine Corps flag. I couldn't believe it. Or maybe I could. This was the world Karen had built, and the board had enforced it without question. But not everyone was on board anymore. A few OA members had apparently jumped ship after the Karen scandal and were now willing to talk. One, who asked to stay anonymous, sent me a scanned email thread from 3 months earlier. It was between Karen and the other board members discussing ways to neutralize dissident property owners, her exact words. They even joked about who should accidentally get double charged for trash pickup. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and then started drafting a formal petition to have the OA audited. That same week, someone egged my front door. At first I thought it was kids, but then I found a small note tucked under the welcome mat. "You brought this on yourself. We keep this community clean for a reason." It was typed, anonymous, and definitely not the work of any children. Maya found a smudge on the back corner, makeup, possibly foundation, and ran it through a basic forensics kit she used to train with. It wasn't conclusive, but we both knew whose foundation that was. I installed more cameras and floodlights. I wasn't just angry now. I was focused. If they wanted to keep pushing, I would push back with a wrecking ball. We printed flyers and slipped them into mailboxes. Simple bullet points about Karen's arrest, the HOA's retaliation campaign, and the growing archive of mismanagement evidence. We didn't use inflammatory language, just facts, photos, and a link to the video. A few days later, someone spray-painted "TR Teller" on my fence. I took it as a compliment. Then came the knock at my door. A man in his 60s, gray hair and deeply creased eyes. He introduced himself as Mark, a former HOA board member who had resigned 2 years ago after ethical disagreements. He stepped inside and handed me a thick folder. Inside were documents showing financial irregularities, payments made to Karen's personal contractor for repairs that were never done, checks signed without approval, and a memo suggesting she used HOA funds to install a pergola in her own backyard. Mark was quiet but firm. "I didn't have the nerve to say anything before," he admitted, "but after what you did, people are finally listening." That night, I sent everything to the local reporter who had reached out about the original arrest video. He promised to run a story if I could get at least 5 residents willing to speak on the record. By the end of the weekend, I had 15. A formal hearing was scheduled by the county's Neighborhood Oversight Committee. Karen didn't show up, her lawyer did, and he looked like a man who regretted accepting the case. But I wasn't done yet. The board was still intact, still quietly issuing violations and trying to salvage the system. That's when I started the petition, one to remove not just Karen but the entire board. It spread like wildfire. Mia set up a signature tracker. We needed 50% of the homeowners to sign. Within a week we had 70%. By the end of the second week, nearly 90%. The board called an emergency meeting and I showed up with the receipts. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, the same place where Karen used to deliver her painfully long lectures about paint shades and holiday decorations. That evening, however, the mood was different. The room was packed. Folding chairs had been dragged in from other rooms, and people were standing in the back or lining the walls. A murmur of tension filled the air. Not the usual stiff silence Karen used to demand. It was the sound of people who had finally had enough. Some looked nervous, others were angry, but everyone was ready for answers. At the front of the room sat the remaining HOA board members, Ron, Joyce, and Bill, looking visibly uncomfortable. Their usual smug expressions were replaced with the tight, forced smiles of people who knew the tide was turning. Ron cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. "Let's keep this civil," he began, his voice slightly cracking. "This meeting is to address recent events and clarify misunderstandings regarding community policies." I stood up before he could say another word. Mia was next to me, laptop in hand. I didn't need a mech. The room went quiet the moment I spoke. "There's been no misunderstanding," I said calmly. "There's misconduct, abuse of authority, forgery, and targeted harassment of homeowners who did nothing but ask for peace." Ron shifted in his seat. "Sir, we encourage residents to submit formal complaints through the proper channels." "You mean the same channels Karen controlled?" I interrupted. "The ones where every complaint disappeared or got turned into another violation." I held up a copy of the document Mark, the former board member who'd come forward, had provided. "We have evidence of falsified citations, misuse of HOA funds, and unauthorized surveillance. We have names, dates, emails, and now we have signatures. Over 90% of the community wants this board removed." There was a pause, the kind of pause that holds weight. The board members exchanged looks. They knew it wasn't just about Karen anymore. They were part of it, whether through action or silence. Bill tried to interject, but Mia stepped forward and connected her laptop to the projector. The screen flickered, and the room dimmed. First came the surveillance clip, Karen entering my house, moving freely through it. Then the soundbite of her justifying it to police, insisting she had every right. Then came a series of scanned violation slips from other residents, each with forged initials or manufactured infractions. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Then came the financial records, displayed side-by-side comparisons of authorized edge spending and Karen's personal landscaping receipts. The dates matched perfectly. Thousands had been spent on community upgrades. That turned out to be Karen's backyard spa, her new pergola, and the white gravel path nobody else had seen. Donna, the widow with the memorial bench, stood up next. "I've lived here for 37 years, she said, voice trembling. "I've never once broken a rule, and Karen fined me for having a tribute to my late husband. Called it a safety hazard. That bench was his favorite place to sit, and she made me tear it down." The room exploded in murmurs. Even the board members looked shaken. Joyce leaned into her mic and tried a different tactic. "We understand emotions are high, but let's not rush to judgment. Karen's actions were isolated." Isolated. That's when I pulled out the HOA internal emails, the ones Mia had recovered from an old Google Drive account. One thread showed Joyce approving the funds for Karen's illegal backyard additions. Another had Bill mocking residents in a message titled, "Complaint Olympics." "Still want to say this was isolated?" I asked. The silence that followed was brutal. A vote was proposed. The bylaws allowed for the full removal of board members if enough verified homeowners signed a petition and attended a quorum meeting. I brought physical copies of the signatures. People began lining up to sign again just to show they meant it. The board tried to delay the vote by saying they needed legal counsel, but we had our own legal expert in the room, a retired municipal judge who lived 3 houses down from me. He stood and confirmed that the removal vote was legal and enforceable, and effective immediately with the quorum present. All 3 members were voted out by overwhelming majority. They didn't even argue. Ron slumped back in his seat. Joyce grabbed her purse. Bill muttered something under his breath and walked out. No one clapped. No one shouted. It was quiet, calm, and powerful. The kind of moment that didn't need celebration because it carried the weight of justice. But just when it felt like the storm had passed, it flared back to life. 2 days later, I got a call from a neighbor whose cameras had picked up a figure lurking around his home late at night. We reviewed the footage. The blurry image wasn't definitive, but the walk, the hair, the purse, it looked like Karen. She was supposed to be avoiding any interaction with residents while under investigation. But there she was, roaming at night like some suburban ghost. Me enhanced the footage. There was enough to submit a police report for a restraining order violation. We sent it in immediately. The same night, I received an anonymous letter on my porch. No envelope, no signature. Just 4 words written in block letters. You think you've won? Taped to the paper was a printed screenshot of me speaking at the HOA meeting. That was the final straw. I called a friend at the local news station who had been following the story. He agreed it was time to go public again. A follow-up report aired 2 days later. This time not just about Karen, but the entire dismantled board, the retaliations, the finances, and the new threats. Public opinion hit a breaking point. Karen became a local cautionary tale. But revenge wasn't what kept me going. What drove me now was the community itself. The neighbors who'd been silenced for years, the families fined for wind chimes, flags, even chalk drawings their kids made on the driveway. I wasn't just restoring peace, I was helping return dignity to a neighborhood that had been ruled like a kingdom. We held a town vote for a temporary new board. A diverse group of residents stepped up, Donna among them. Mia offered to help with digital transparency, creating a new website where every financial report, citation, and change would be logged and open to the public. Within days, the mood of the neighborhood shifted. People talked more freely. Flags went back up. Wind chimes sang again. The park was full of kids instead of complaints. I got one last notice in the mail, but this time it wasn't a fine. No signature, no return address. Just 2 lines. I hope it was worth it. Some locks won't stop me. Maya upgraded our system again, this time including motion-activated lights, a silent outdoor perimeter tripwire, and a secondary panic button inside the hallway wall. We weren't living in fear, we were living in preparation. Karen's reign was over, but her resentment lingered like smoke after a fire. She wasn't going to stop trying to haunt us from the outside. But it didn't matter anymore, because now the neighborhood stood together, and I was ready for whatever came next.